countries the storage perspective. To begin the meeting, I would like to invite Mr. Ramesh Kumar, Chief of Unit, Program and Project Implementation Cluster, ISA, to deliver the welcome remarks. Our DG is a few minutes late, so he will be joining a little later. And Ramesh ji has very kindly agreed to my request to give the welcome address. Over to you, Ramesh ji.
Thank you, Mridula. I'm Ramesh Kumar. I'm the Chief of Unit for Program and Projects in International Solar Alliance. So, Dr. Kuldeep Rana, Director, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, I think he is joining virtually. Uh, so he'll be there on a virtual mode. Uh, Mr. Suman Sinha, Chairman and Managing Director, Renew Power India. Dr. Martin Keller, Director, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, USA. Honorable dignitaries, speakers, and participants, I welcome you all to the COP28 UAE session 3 on Universal Energy Access for LDCs and SIDS countries, the storage perspective. This topic is critical in the global clean energy transition, but is often less discussed. Sustainable Development Goal SDG 7 aims to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030, which is also closely linked with SDG 13, which is on climate change adaptation. ISA has collaborated closely with member countries facing energy access deficits, devising models to use solar energy to bridge the energy access gap, increase energy security, and promote energy transition. Just to put the context, since 2015 Paris Agreement, global economies have recognized the need for affordable and clean energy for climate change mitigation and sustainable development. However, at the current pace, an estimated 660 million people may lack electricity and 1.9 billion people may lack access to clean cooking fuels by if we go by the current trend by 2030, which is very alarming. We in fact ISA had conducted a study which says globally the electricity access stands about 91% today, which may incrementally go up to 92% if we go in the current rate. So there is a requirement to accelerate the uh, energy access to the people. While electrification rates in the LDCs have remained relatively low at 56%, in contrast, access to electricity is higher in the SIDS, uh, reaching 76%. So I think in the SIDS, it is more of energy transition rather than electricity access issues. That's what we have seen. Uh, Additionally, the compounded annual growth rate of installed renewable capacity per capita was highest in the SIDS at 8.5%, followed by the LDCs at 5.5%. Significant progress has been made, but greater efforts are needed to achieve universal energy access by 2030. Connecting the last mile requires collaboration among multiple stakeholders with available solution as we outlined in ISA's roadmap of solar energy for universal energy access, which we release part of G20 presidency of hosted by Government of India in the current year. According to ISA's analysis, 59%, that's almost 396 million people can be electrified through solar based mini grids. About 203 million people who are in the remote areas, the mini grids also may not be feasible. We may have to go for standalone system. Uh, Sorry, 200 people, 203 million people, we can use the grid extension. I'm sorry for that. And that will be economically possible. About 77 million people, we need to look for DRE solutions because neither grid extension nor the solar mini grids will be feasible. This is what we have seen our studies, which we have conducted very recently. That means we need to work on grid extension to certain strata of the people, certain areas which are within 10 to 15 or maximum 20 kilometers range from the existing grids. People can have more access through grid extension. Beyond these 20 kilometers, it may not be economical to go for grid extension. So the mini grid plays very important role there. That's what we have seen. And of course, the far areas which are and sparsely populated, we should look for the standalone system. So a combination of all the three may be the roadmap for achieving the 100% electricity access by 2030. The conventional approach of extending the grids is being challenged by the availability of sustainable option. So solar energy coupled along with the battery storage is a very viable option for rural electrification or in the mini grids. Uh, According to IEA's new policy scenario, which is in short NPS, electricity demand is projected to grow by about 20% in the next decade, with battery storage contributing 400 gigawatt by 2040. Falling cost, increasing capacity installation, driven by lithium-ion batteries, offer short-term storage solution. Further cost declines for battery storage system are anticipated, with costs projected to fall to $220 per kilowatt hour by 2040, as per the NPS. While technology solutions are available, key enabling factors must be in place for deployment, especially in LDCs and SIDS. These factors include conducive policies, access to affordable finance, and creating an ecosystem for so that the consumer and institutional capacity, the consumers are benefited and the institutional capacities are built. ISA is actively supporting many of the member countries with one with we are in the process of creating a global solar finance facility so that the private investment can be attracted. We are also working on capacity building, including the Star C to set up the solar technology application centers in the country. Along with, we are also supporting to groom more entrepreneurs as startup ventures so that more people can be attracted to do the investment in the solar space. So I'm confident that the perspectives and experience shared by today's panelists, the eminent panelists, will deepen our understanding and appreciation of the entire ecosystem surrounding sustainable and affordable energy access. With this, I invite all delegates to engage in a very fruitful deliberations and take the path of our achieving SDG 7 goals for universal energy access powered by solar energy and storage solutions. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh Kumar. We have to slightly change the sequence because Dr. Martin Keller have to leave for another session, and I took permission from Mr. Sumant Sena. Um, so, may I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Martin Keller to give the feature presentation? And Dr. Keller, as you know, is director of NREL and president of the Alliance for Sustainable Energy since 2015. He has transformed NREL's landscape. Under his leadership, NREL's partnership surged to over 1,000, generating $1 billion in R&D alone. Dr. Keller's visionary approach expanded NREL's full-time employees by 82%. His strategic focus is on integrated energy pathways, circular economy, and groundbreaking research projects, partnerships. Over to you, Dr. Keller.
So thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. So I thought I set the stage by giving you a few high. Can you have the first slide, please? So giving you a couple of slides about energy storage, and I think to summarize all this, it will be absolutely critical that we further bring the cost down, and you will see how we implementing this and the importance of doing that. So you just had it before. Can we go to the first slide, please? Okay, perfect. So I don't know if it works. Okay, so just a little bit about NREL, just for you who don't know us. So please come and visit us. We're in Golden, Colorado. We about, said 3,675 people working in the energy transition. And in there, we also have a big, what I said, and on the research, a lot of work in renewable energy, sustainable transportation, buildings, and systems integration. And what for us is really key, that's also why we are so excited about our partnership we have in here with ISA and others, is partnerships. So we have more than 1,000 active partnerships in 23. That's very important. There are a lot of also them with industry to really accelerate the energy transition. And the next slide. So I don't know if this works. Okay, here. So when you look at our storage portfolio, it's very broad. So we are covering a lot of things from seasonal to stationary, thermal, pumped hydro, transportation, loads, renewables, and storage analysis. So we have a very broad portfolio in energy storage, and we also see this because that's a critical element for us to do the energy transition, move the clean electricity forward. So that's why storage in our portfolio is such an important element. We are seeing that by the changing of the grid, and you see this on the slide down here, the grid of the future will be very complicated. And we've heard this also a little bit in the introduction, but being bidirectional, a lot of things going on there. It will be a smart grid. So that's also why, in our view, three things are really important to move this forward. Number one is the grid modernization. So make the grid flexible, automated, and efficient. We allow for more efficient use of existing grid capacity. Bidirectional communication will be the key. And then you're combining this with storage. Especially when you look at this, supports large-scale integration of wind and solar, provides value across a range of grid services, helps to mitigate impact of periods with extreme operating conditions. The LA 100 study we have done for Los Angeles showed that 91% of new rooftops solar by 2045 will have storage located with them. So this is what we're seeing is a big trend. But we also want to highlight the last point here, that also smart appliances on the efficiency side will play a major role. We've done some studies there that 600 million for new appliances can save about 6 billion in the US power systems by not building new plants. So this is why this combination by smart appliances with storage and grid modernization will be a key to accelerate the energy transition. Storage is crucial enabler for deep decarbonization. When you look at this right now, there's 670 gigawatt of storage interconnections are in the queue. So this is for nearly 1 terawatt of solar and 300 gigawatt of wind. So we're seeing how storage in the United States is getting now deployed at a very fast rate. When you look at storage, of course, we do talking a lot about short-term duration. Lithium batteries play a bigger role here, all the way to long duration, which is pumped storage, compressed air, iron air battery, green hydrogen, thermoelectric, and others. So we need a broad range of storage. So from, let's say, lithium ion up to 4 hours, but all the way almost to very long time, more than 10 hours. We need both of these big types of storage. Pumped hydro is also very interesting right now. So far, this is the most deployed storage system. When you look at this, it's about 160 gigawatt in 21. Global capacity was about 8,500 gigawatt in 2020, and accounting for at this time about 90% of total global electricity storage. But you can see on the right slide here that now batteries are catching up. So when you look at this now, that lithium battery are going and getting deployed to very large levels, and we're seeing the deep costs in the storage technology by batteries, especially in the United States and China, is leading this to get gigawatt scale additions of battery on our grid systems. So When you look at also, we have just finished the annual storage studies, which was, I think, very important to see where are we going. And I will show you some of the very high level outcomes of this study. But again, we did this to see, we analyzed the rapidly increasing role of energy storage in the electrical grid through 2050. So what's going on in this area, where we are moving. And again, I will show you, there's the study on our website if you are interested in getting more details. But I thought I'd just highlight for you the very, the takeaway messages by the studies. So, okay. So, number one, storage is poised for rapid growth. So, we all have seen this right now. This trend will continue and even will accelerate. Number two, cost reductions to continue with lithium ion battery to lead market for some time. We're seeing that now this has dropped by more than 80%. This trend will continue. Number three, ability to provide firm capacity is primary driver for of deployment. So this is what utilities want. So this will continue. Number four, declining costs have changed use of storage for flexibility. So this is also bringing additional benefits to the utilities. That's why they're also starting now to deploy this. When you then go to the number five, storage and PV complement each others. We talked about this earlier. It's the perfect synergy by having solar, the sun goes down, you have storage built in, you're bridging a lot of times when you, for example, look at Texas, where solar goes down before wind kicks in, there's about this 2 to 3 hour windows. So this is perfect why lithium ion batteries can cover this limit. That's why it goes so nicely together. Lower cost value of backup power boosts building level storage adoption. Now we're seeing also this, and I showed you this in LA, that more and more systems will now integrate solar and storage in your homes. Number seven, storage durations will likely increase as deployments increase. So costs will go down. With this, you will increase the time where you can build storage during this time. And number eight, seasonal storage becomes especially important for 100% clean systems. All the studies we have done with LA 100, Puerto Rico 100 show that storage, if you want to go to 100% renewable system, will be a key element on our grid of the future. So this is just a very quick overview to set the stage for this session. I apologize that I have to run to sign some MOUs with some ministers. That's why I have to leave you all. But I think overall, what I said earlier, storage is critical. We need to deploy it at high rates. We see a decreasing cost coming towards us. So this is why storage will even accelerate in the next years to come. So thank you, and I really appreciate to be here as a speaker to you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin, for a very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and invite Mr. Sumant Sinha, who very kindly accepted our invitation to deliver the keynote address. Mr. Sinha is founder and chairman and CEO of NASDAQ listed Renew, drives a 14 gigawatt clean energy empire. Pioneering renewables, Sumanji champions holistic solutions encompassing energy, storage, and hydrogen, crucial for climate action. Globally, he leads the advisory board of the Global Wind Energy Council and the board of trustees of the Rocky Mountain Institute. His impact resonates in 150 plus opinion pieces and a book, Fossil Free. Over to you, Mr. Sinha.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me for this session, which is, of course, incredibly important. Universal access is something that a lot of us tend to lose sight of in the day to day of what we are doing. And it's great that ISA is championing this cause because obviously it is critical for developing countries in which India hopes to find a leading role in implementing solutions that work at scale. Um, Hopefully by doing it first in India and then setting an example for other parts of the world. Um, you know, uh, I think the first element, if I think about the topic for universal access, is, and I'm going to interweave the fact that universality has to be clean. There's no point in having universal access if it's dirty power, right? Of course, there is benefit from an economic standpoint, but ultimately it has to be clean power that we are talking about. So I'm going to make that assumption in the remarks that I make, therefore. So I think the first thing that needs to be done to get universal access is that we need to essentially, whatever is the grid that we have, we need to make sure that we green that grid, and that we make sure that whatever power is going in is as green as possible. Now, that's a little bit hard to do for countries like India and other developing countries. Reason being that we are growing at such a rapid clip in terms of our power demand that it is even if we deploy renewables at the fastest possible rate, it is still not going to be sufficient to meet power demand growth. And so, therefore, whether we like it or not, either we compromise on our economic growth, which I don't think any country would want to do, or we essentially postpone the replacement of coal-based or fossil fuel-based capacities till such time that we are handily able to increase our installations of renewables to a point where we are meeting power demand growth quite comfortably. So I think that is step one of what needs to be done, which is that we need to increase the deployment of renewables as rapidly as possible and feed that power into the grid and make sure that at least all new power going into the grid is clean, and then over time switch that to replacing existing capacities. But I suspect that that will take us at least another 10 to 15 years before we can get to that point. And I'm speaking from an India standpoint, but the same applies to a lot of other developing countries. If anything, I would say India is further ahead of the curve on deploying renewable energy than a lot of other developing countries are. And therefore, India will probably get there faster than other developing countries. But certainly in the next 15 to 20 years, I would imagine that we can start really eating into the absolute deployed capacity of thermal or fossil fuel based capacities. So I think that is step one. The second thing that we need to do is we need to electrify everything as far as possible. And we need to really make sure that large swathes of our use case areas for energy move to electricity. For example, mobility is the most obvious example, right? We have to make sure that consumers buy only electric cars going forward, and that eventually that electricity that goes into those electric cars is, in fact, clean. So I think that's the second leg of what we need to do, which is to really move as many use cases as we can towards electricity and increase the electricity part market share or share of the total energy mix. So that's step number two. Step number three essentially is that obviously we can't electrify everything, right? And so we need to find ways to solve the rest of the energy value chain. And that certainly is possible now, or large parts of that is possible now with the advent of green hydrogen. Now, of course, green hydrogen today is more expensive, but costs will come down over time. And as that happens, we can then move the green hydrogen area much more into the rest of the energy value chain, and thereby essentially make sure that the rest of the energy ecosystem also becomes green. Then the question is, how do we make sure that the energy or the electricity gets to every single last home in the country? And I think that's where India has done a phenomenal job. I know that there is a lot of talk about microgrids and standalone solutions and so on. My feeling, however, is that the best solution ultimately is going to come from extending the grid to every single home. And that's the effort that India has done very successfully over the last several years. And I think that's the effort that every single country, developing country, needs to put in. Now, it may not be practical for some of the small island states because obviously they just don't have that ability to generate at large scale and then supply to obviously all parts of the country because they're all scattered. But certainly for large developing countries, that's eminently possible. So I think every country needs to make sure that there is a huge amount of effort in electrifying, in extending the grid, um, to all parts of the country and then to every single household, as we have done over the last 5, 7 years. Now, l- the other large developing area, developing country area, which very often features in conversations like this one, obviously is Africa. Africa, funnily enough, has a similar population as India has, close to about 1.4 to 1.5 billion people. Uh, but there's a lot of obviously a lot of inequality in the continent, given the differences in the countries there. But there are some fundamental issues that Africa needs to do. One is that that there aren't any the whole continent is not really connected by a single grid. And that actually creates a lot of issues because you can't then generate power in one part of the continent and move it to some other part, as you can do in India. So, which goes back to my point that you need to extend the grid as far as possible, even within the continent of Africa. And then again, every country has to make sure that they then extend the grid into every single household. So I think that to me is a better solution than to set up microgrids uh, and then set up generating capacities also at the micro level, which of course will in the short term provide the solution, certainly and potentially, but it'll be at a much higher cost. And so if you want a just transition to happen, there is it's better for people, of course, to have power than not to have it. But if you give them power at very high cost, then that's not really the right solution either. And so eventually, if you do have the grid going everywhere and you're able to give people prices that are based on grid power rather than on local generation, to me that's a long term, that's a better solution. Now the problem with microgrids also is, and I may be saying things that a lot of you may not agree with, is that um, when you build a microgrid, you risk it becoming a stranded asset. Because let's say 5 years or 7 years later, the grid does show up. Then what happens to the investment in that microgrid, or what happens to that investment in the small generating capacity that might have been made there? Of course, if the payback is quick enough, then it's one thing. But if the payback is to be quicker, then the prices of the power generated by that microgrid will therefore also be higher, and therefore whether that works for the local communities or not remains to be seen. Now, I think this is where solar has an incredibly important role to play and can actually act as the bridge because solar has this incredible um, quality that it does not become a lot higher cost if you go down in scale. We all know that if you go up in scale, obviously costs do come down. But in solar, that does not happen. One panel will generate almost the same cost as a million panels will in terms of the power generation. And so, therefore, perhaps one of the solutions is to essentially connect um, local microgrids to solar-based solutions to the extent that there is good natural resource there, and and then eventually when the grid does show up, you connect the microgrid to the main grid, and it becomes part of the overall grid. Now, of course, there also you'll have to look at what the cost of the solar panel is and whether you're able to amortize the cost fully before the grid shows up. It should not happen that because there is a microgrid and is generating prices, power at higher cost, that the government of that country decides that, okay, look, these people already have power and therefore we really don't need to extend the grid there. And so therefore those folks will forever be paying higher costs for their power potentially. So I think that is something that there needs to be very clear government policy around. Now, the previous gentleman from NREL talked about storage. Storage, of course, is incredibly critical because solar by itself cannot solve the problem, as we all know. If that is the only generating source, then it will only work in the daytime. It will not work in the evening and at nighttime. And storage, to the extent that we have battery-based storage, can actually extend the timeline out to late in the evening, but certainly it cannot solve the problem at night. And so obviously the lower the cost of the batteries, the more you can extend the timeline. But even so, there are physical limitations to how much you can do. And that is why my thesis continues to be that eventually the best solution is to actually get the grid there, because then the grid can take care of all the storage requirements and so on that need to be done rather than doing everything at a local level, which is highly suboptimal. It may make us feel good that we've actually solved a problem temporarily, but it's not long term going to be a good solution. Um, in addition to that, if I sort of extend it from the retail side and look further at the development of solar, I think what is going to happen is that in the next 7 to 10 years, the price of solar is going to come down to maybe half of what it is right now. In India today, you can produce solar power at 2.5 rupees a kilowatt hour, let's say roughly about 3 cents. In a lot of other countries where the cost of capital is lower, where the cost of land may be cheaper, you can produce it at maybe a cent or a cent and a half. And if that comes down by 50%, then you can imagine that is going to fundamentally upend the generation side of the energy markets quite substantially. But in addition to that, solar has a lot of versatility in that at some point we'll be able to just coat all windows in buildings with solar generating solar electricity and generating films. and we probably be able to put it on car tops, and a whole host of different kinds of applications will emerge. And that will then really democratize the whole ability to generate power at a very individual and retail level. Now, I don't think we are that far away from that point. I think in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll really see a lot of that happening. And that is going to change, as I said, or cause a discontinuous change in the markets. And that will lead to much cheaper universal access of electricity as we go forward. So I'm very excitedly, in some ways, waiting for some of these developments to happen. Um, I'm really curious about how much battery costs can be driven down further. I think there is no end to human ingenuity, and so therefore that gives me optimism that prices will continue to come down, and therefore we should make decisions that are based on, or policy decisions that are based on looking at these longer term developments as well, and not make decisions, policy decisions especially, that are based on the here and now of the technology, but they should be future looking if we are to make the right choices. I would say India has done some things phenomenally well. Um, First of all, we have a single national grid. It's the single largest grid in the world, and it's fully interconnected. And so that allows us to essentially generate power in any part of India and transfer it to any other part of India. And because it's free of charge, it's actually very beneficial for renewable energy projects. The second thing is that it also allows us to virtually create these solutions that we call in India round the clock power solutions, where we're essentially able to give to the utilities 80% or 85% capacity utilization factors by using a combination of wind, solar, and storage, and are able to essentially replicate almost quasi baseload power by doing this. And we can do this at prices which are 25 to 30% cheaper than coal based power today. And that's actually incredibly powerful because as battery costs keep coming down, we'll be able to firm up the renewable energy part more and more. And I'm pretty sure that because battery costs will come down, we'll be able to do it at prices which are going to be still cheaper than coal based power. And and part of the reason also we can do this apart from the grid is that India has a very active merchant market, which means that if you have any overflow power in terms of this construction of wind, solar, and storage, you can sell it into the merchant market, which allows us therefore to construct these products almost virtually across the entire national grid. Um, and that's something I have not seen really any other country in the world doing that kind of thing. And I think that's really, I think puts India right at the cutting edge of innovation in this area. The other thing I would say is that I've heard a lot of complaints from countries, other developing countries, that the developed world grew using fossil fuels, and now there's a lot of pressure on the developing countries not to use fossil fuels, and therefore there is this sense of the fact that something is being taken away from them, and they are being penalized. And I think what that misses out is the fact that today renewable energy is much cheaper than the alternative of fossil fuels. It is more capital intensive, but it is much cheaper eventually in terms of the levelized cost of energy. And if most countries deeply understood this, then they would essentially say that this is the way for us to actually grow instead of growing through fossil fuels. And that's the view that India has taken. India has been very pragmatic about it and has taken the view that we need to grow rapidly using clean energy because it allows us to create a whole new economic ecosystem and allows us to position ourselves as the manufacturing alternative, for example, to China. So a lot of other developing countries, I think, need to follow that same policy of saying, you know what, guys, let's really just almost entirely devolve to clean energy. Now, the question that arises then is how do you solve the capital intensity problem? And that's a tougher one. That's a tougher nut to crack because a lot of the developing countries don't have good off-taker credit profile. They don't have. They have poor sovereign risk issues, and they don't have good contractual backing. And especially because you sell for 25 years, if you don't have some of that, then who's going to finance it, right? And this is really where the multilateral development banks need to step in a very big way and work with these developing countries on coming up with solutions that are not direct loans, but that catalyze more private capital to come in. Uh, Now, again, I take the example of India. Earlier we used to sell power to the utilities directly, which had very iffy credit qualities. So our cost of financing used to be higher. And at some point, lenders would say, why should I even lend to you? Um, what the Indian government did is very smart. And this is one of the most underappreciated aspects of the Indian clean energy story, is that they created a federal entity called the Solar Energy Corporation of India, and our PPAs started, and then this entity then started carrying out common auctions. They sold the power to the utilities and in turn signed PPAs with us. And so our counterparty risk suddenly transferred to the federal government as opposed to the state governments and their utilities, and allowed us to get financing at much lower cost. And because it was a competitive bidding environment, we therefore used that lower financing cost to decrease the tariffs, which in turn was passed on to the ultimate buyers of power. So actually, it was a win-win for everybody. Now, this is a very simple solution in hindsight, right? And it's right there. It's sitting right there, right? So what a lot of developing countries actually can do is create maybe a regional entity like that with maybe some first loss guarantee of that federal entity from one of the multilateral development banks, and let that entity then become the intermediary between people who are generating the power and selling it then to various state governments. So if you apply your mind, there are many, many things that can be done to address the problem of creating more and more clean energy, address the capital intensity. Um, Pathways are there. Pathways, I think, are laid out. It's really now the onus is on governments to implement. And for ultimately, the corporate sector and financial markets and financial capital will respond to the incentives and the investing environment that is created. They will not on their own move unless there is reasonable return and reasonable risk. And if that environment is created, then you'll see certainly a lot of capital going in. So that capital intensity problem can get addressed and can get solved in a number of different ways. So I think there are many things that can be done. I hope that in events like this and forums like this, where there are like 1,000 conferences like this going on at the same time, maybe some of this kind of cross pollination can happen. And some of the developing countries, I think, can learn from people like India. And I say that even though I'm Indian, because India has been a pretty sort of good leader, I think, in this area, and has set up. And for example, the ISA also was set up at the instance of India. So I think these are mechanisms that have to be followed to really roll out the whole area of clean universal access, which I think is really almost unstated, but really is fundamental in providing universal access. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for a very thought provoking and excellent presentation. We have a short intervention by Mr. Kuldeep Rana. He's from Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. And is the link ready, please? Okay. So Mr. Rana is Scientist E, Director, Energy Storage, Circular Economy, and E-Mobility. And he's going to share his thought on this topic with us. Over to you, Mr. Rana.
Am I audible? Yeah. So, good afternoon, all the esteemed delegates. So, uh, as I'm working in the ministry as a director of storage, so I'm looking after energy storage, circular economy plans. And I would like to emphasize the significance of energy storage and what is going on and what is being developed in India. So, as the global shift towards green energy gains momentum, so underscored importance lies in the recognizing the crucial role of energy storage. So this serves to optimize the utilization of renewable energy, expand electricity availability in developing nations, and fortify the resilience of the worldwide energy system. So we have currently there are a lot of option for there are various technologies are available in the market which depends on the electrical, mechanical, electrochemical, and various types to store the energy. So a combination of both. What is the need? Current need is to focus both on the short terms and the long term energy storage solutions, which are required to create a reliable and resilient energy storage that can keep power for longer periods and keep grid stable. So at the same time, we are working on the adoption of the electric power mobility in the country, which is a good solution for the make transportation more environmental friendly. However, to achieve global sustainability, there is a need for the strong policies that effectively utilize renewable energy sources through storage system. So as we know that in our ministry and other, there is a commitment by India as we by 2070, India has committed achieving net zero emissions. So along with this target, India has also set an aggressive clean energy target for 2030 by achieving 500 gigawatt of the installed capacity from non-fossil resources. So managing the fluctuation and intermittency in renewable power, especially from the sun and wind, will require extensive storage system, which will be integrated with the power grid. And there is huge demand in India for for the integration and to facilitate and to remove this problem of the intermittency and fluctuation in the grid. So globally, there is an increased number of the people who are utilizing storage, particularly with the solar energy, and there is a fast growth for especially for the battery energy storage as well as a pump hydro storage. So it is almost been 68% increase compared to 2021. So it is projected that by 2030, global energy storage capacity will reach up to 1.43 terawatt hours, and with as underscoring the necessity for the policies to accelerate the deployment of energy storage projects. So globally, two-thirds of the countries have enacted dedicated policies and regulation for renewable energy. However, it is important to that only half of the least developed countries and third of the small island developing states have implemented such measures. So shifting toward the solar plus storage projects, operational parameters, maintenance need, and performance characteristics. So decision making in this scenario becomes intricate, underscoring the significance of expert guidance for the ensuring successful operation. To address this gap, the government of India has taken various initiatives to promote energy storage. As we have developed the energy storage system roadmap for India 2019 to 32 and the national framework for the promoting energy storage system to lay the groundwork for the creating a positive ecosystem that facilitate the rapid scaling up of the renewable plus storage project deployment. And the storage capacity requirement established by 2032 would be around, which is estimated under this framework, so which is estimated around 411 gigawatt hours, which includes both pump hydro storage as well as the battery storage. So almost the estimated uh, uh, pump storage will be around 175 gigawatt hours, and the battery storage will be around 236 gigawatt hour required India for by 2032. So we have also issued guidelines for procurement of utilization of the BSS as part of the generation, transmission, and distribution assets, along with ancillary services, renewable purchase obligation, and energy storage obligation trajectory till 2090, 29 to 30, battery waste management rule 2022 for safe disposal of the batteries, in the guidelines for the tariff-based competitive bidding process for procurement of firm and dispatchable power from the grid-connected renewable energy. So also it's tariff-based global competitive bidding for the setting of the 500 megawatt or 1000 megawatt hour standalone BSS pilot projects. Tariff has been issued. So to reduce the levelized cost of, because the adoption of the storage in the renewable sectors, main hurdle is to the levelized cost of storage. Currently, the storage cost is too high. So in that case, to reduce the levelized cost of storage, Union government recently approved the viability gap funding scheme for 4,000 megawatt hour of the BSS, where the 40% uh, uh, capex will be supported by the government. Also, Government of India has launched a production-linked incentive scheme for manufacturing of advanced chemistry cell batteries up to 50 gigawatt hour capacity annually. So these are the main policies issue, and the different schemes has been announced by the Government of India. So the from main recommendation from our side will be for the planning. For the planning, we need to assess the electricity demand and the potential disruption to power grid. which can help in identify the types, capacity, and the location for the required energy storage. And the second thing, the technology, we have to focus and invest on the R&D for the development of new technology for the mostly for the battery-based energy storage system. So because there are already various technology are available, but we need to reduce the localized cost of storage. We need a separate like PLI type scheme for which is focused for the uh, large scale and the long duration storage for the grid connectivity. So authority and local technical expert to build their know-how and gain confidence in the technology. It's not only the investment. So it is very much important to localize or the domestic production. And for that, we have to have the experts and who knows how to this self fabrication and then battery fabrication and then materials. How this know-how is a must. Then finance part, which involve finance. So we have to innovative business model with support from multilateral development banks and other global institutions, which can reduce the barrier of the high cost of the batteries. Then we need a policy instrument. So distributed generation and storage by consumers can be increased through the incentive like import duty waiver, capital subsidies, and the tax rebates. So right now, as in most of the battery machineries or the raw materials for the different type of storage is being imported. So this type of uh, incent- incentive may be given to the, the manufacturer so that the cost of storage comes down. So these are the recommendations from our side. So thank you very much for, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rana. Very nice of you to have agreed to our invite at a very short notice. We are grateful.
Thank you.
Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, we begin the panel discussion now. May I invite Dr. Rahul Valavalkar to please come on the dais and moderate the session. Dr. Rahul Valavalkar, President and MD of Customized Energy Solutions India, spearheads global leadership in energy storage, renewables, EVs, and smart grids. Founder of the India Energy Storage Alliance, our co host for this session. He is Niti Ayog's Technical Advisory Committee member and pivotal to the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission Advisory Committee. May I also request our panelists, Mr. Vijayanand Samudrala, President, New Energy, Amar Raja Energy and Mobility Limited, India, please. Ms. Mukabanji Matanda, Business Development Manager, Southern Africa, Onji Energy Access, Zambia. Mr. Stephen Fernandez, President, Customized Energy Solutions, USA. Over to you, Rahul. This presentation is first.
So thank you very much, Dr. Mridula. And first of all, I'd like to thank the International Solar Alliance for bringing attention to this topic, and also thank all the esteemed panelists who have already shared some of their insights. And I think with some of these opening remarks, I think the task for this panel is cut out very clearly, because as it was evident from some of the opening remarks, there are two prevalent views. One is that yes, mini grids are essential for the last mile connectivity, especially for the last billion or slightly less than billion people who are still do not have access to energy. And there is a other view that the best and most economical way to achieve it is to achieve it through grid expansion. My personal view as a student of economics and public policy is there is no one answer which is going to fit every country and every region. There is a economic balance in terms of how much is the load, what is the load profile, how much is the distance for required for transmitting that power, which will determine if a centralized approach or a decentralized approach is going to work. And other aspect which I would like to highlight, and one of the great visionary scientists from India, Dr. Homi Bhabha, used to say this, that no power is as costly as no power. And this is an aspect which I think we need to realize that many times when we start looking at large scale grid projects and we start thinking about 2 rupee per kilowatt hour price and expect that that will happen, we are actually losing decades without access to power for many communities where kids will completely, generations will grow out of that without with waiting for that. And that's where what we feel is that in many of these remote locations or distributed communities, we do see that the most common solution which is being used currently is a diesel generator, which actually cost anywhere between 16 rupees to 30 or 35 rupee per kilowatt hour as a power. So let's not just think that okay, we are going to expand the grid everywhere and we are going to reach that 2 rupee 3 rupee as a end use power deliverability, but we can look at how we can benefit from the advances happening in the distributed generation, especially with solar, with wind, and how combining that with energy storage technologies, not necessarily just batteries, but even other forms of technologies, or even other distributed generation technologies like pico hydro, we could actually enable access to energy, which can be really transformational for the last billion people. And we have three practitioners on this panel who are going to share some of the case studies where they have already implemented these solutions. Now, the key aspect is beyond some of the pilot projects or some of the initial deployment which has happened, can we take these learnings so that each of us or each of the microgrid, mini grid developers or other people who are interested in funding it, such as GAP, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, don't have to learn from their own mistake, but we can learn from each other's learning and really scale up so that we are not going to be again coming and having this discussion maybe 10 years down the line, because India had shown that yes, within last 10 years, India has made tremendous progress with grid expansion. But at the same time, I think the technology progress has made it now possible that we can look at both mini grids, grid enabled mini grids, and where there is a economies of scale, maybe grid expansion, as all three options together, so that by 2030 we can actually really make a difference for the lives of the uh, billions of people who are looking for these solutions. And it is not about just access to energy, but it is access to energy so that it can be used for productive uses, because we have even seen that in Indian context where yes, the grid has reached many villages, but not necessarily for productive uses, because there is typically single phase power supply available, which can help in getting lighting, some household energy usage, cell phone charging, and others, but not necessarily running some productive usage for doing agro processing machinery or other thing. And that's where we are finding that combining mini grids with productive usage of energy actually has a good business model which can be scaled up. So, without further delay, I would like to start with the panel, and I would request Mr. Vijayanan to come in and share. Okay, Steven. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we'll start with Steven, and Steven, please start with your insights. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Rahul's always a difficult person to follow. So first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the panel. One of the things that um, I've been so impressed with over the last 13 years that we've been in India working is how something can seem so slow at the time and so fast in retrospect. And so I think, and here's the slide. So let's see, I hit button. Um, so our goal as a company, so customized energy solution is much less known than companies like NG, Emerge. Um, but we are about 300 people. We focus on helping people understand the market rules, helping people manage generation. So we manage about 20 gigawatts of generation assets, including about 800 megawatts of storage. We, on the retail side, help people that are selling electricity, both at small scale as well as people who are selling gigawatts of power to customers. So to help on the retail side of energy sales. And then in Future Grid, a lot of consulting projects. And so, so that's a little bit of, and then software enabled services. That's a little bit about us. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about the distributed energy side. Certainly, Grid Connected has an important role to play, and grid extension is an important part. But I believe also that there's an important role that distributed microgrids will play in the development of the electricity sector. And then, so a little bit about us. So 2010 is the year that customized energy solutions came to India. At the time, India had about 300 million people that didn't have access to power. Africa, so the darker the color here, the less electricity to access to electricity. So most countries in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, had less than 50% energy access. And so fast forward, 10 years, India, by and large, has 300 million people or so received electrification. But the benefits of electrification have been very unevenly matched. So while electricity is there, and that helps with healthcare, education, lighting, basic things, it hasn't necessarily helped with economic development in these communities. Because just because you have electricity doesn't mean you'll know how to use it more efficiently for productive application. And also the equipment, traditionally three-phase equipment, heavier equipment, is not well suited for a lot of those end of the line applications where voltage is low, where you have power quality, more intermittency. So we've both worked with people on changing the applications, moving from three-phase to single phase, and then also trying to do trainings on how do you use that electricity for productive purposes. So we'll talk about a little bit of in this two sort of case studies on productive use of electricity. One will be based on our study initially of microgrids. So we went to India and we one of our first projects was to monitor about 60 microgrids in India and see what was working, what wasn't working. And the number one thing that wasn't working was the battery side. So storage was collapsing, and there was not the economic engine to replace the batteries. And so the grid ended up being underutilized and ended up failing in many cases. And so we worked on the sulfurization issues associated with lead acid batteries, which are still the dominant battery in microgrids. It's switching to lithium, but there are some supply chain and maintenance and other things that are needed to be addressed in that ecosystem. So with mini grid utilization, so this in Jharkhand, so when we entered, so Jharkhand is a traditional coal hub. So it's a lot of mining. It is reminiscent in the United States of rural Appalachia and rural where economic development is much less. And so when we went there, there was not access to electricity in some of these communities. So we set up a microgrid in this area. But realized for this to be self-sustainable, you had to put in a productive anchor tenant. And so in this one, so there was a microgrid, but it was being underutilized. And so by putting in farming equipment processing, we were able to increase the overall utilization of that electric grid and increase the wealth of that village to be able to then not only pay for electricity, but pay for medical, pay for other life needs. And so that, so Jharkhand was our first initiative in India, where we decided to go ahead ourselves and start building it in order to find out what really works. Because before that, we do a lot of consulting projects. And when you do consulting projects, lots of things work on paper. And not a lot of those paper things work in reality. And so this helped us in finding out what works in reality. Oops, let's see. Okay, so one of the things we realized with trying to help more efficient batteries is just the overall algorithms with how you manage the batteries and how you size it, and was an important part of the solution set. And so, and I won't cover all these points of what intelligent controllers do, but at the end of the day, hopefully your lead acid batteries can last, 5 to 7 years. If you think of right now, the a lot of the grids were lasting for a year and a half or less. And so, how do you make it last longer? How do you make a grid that has lead acid that stopped? Can you re-energize that? Can you essentially break down some of the resistance that occurred in the battery to bring the battery to give it second life? And so I'm working a lot on that area in the algorithms. So these are some of the different sites we've been working on. We have people on this panel that are much more educated than I am on some of the microgrids and so the takes, but now we have had them for 3.5 years, 4 years to be able to look at longevity of how this works over time and had some good successes on the microgrid. So this is a complicated slide. Um, but how do you lay out these systems? Someone was saying that the systems for microgrids are complex, and that's true as opposed to standalone, say, residential systems. But it is also very self-contained, which can give it a lot of resilience. And so when grid power goes out, which is still very common in these areas, because many different things. They tend to be end of line, much more susceptible to environmental factors. And so when it does go out, these microgrids can be much more resilient to the system if designed well. So when we start looking and saying, okay, what can we do to try to help? What was our success metrics? So one was, can we have productive use for more hours of the day? Can we create more jobs and employment opportunities? And can we extend the life of the batteries? And can we better utilize the solar? Because one of the things we were seeing was the solar was being, the battery was being fully charged, and then it maybe only reach half of discharge on a typical day. So you're really not utilizing that to the extent that you could be. And so are there things we can do to have more productive use of that battery and more better utilization? And so these are some of them. And so the sulfur uh, battery charge acceptance. So people say you will rise to your highest level of incompetence, and so this is for me my highest level of incompetence. So I have people on my team that are wonderful chemical engineers that could give this presentation much better than I can. My claim to fame is in bring on people like Rahul that understand this chart, and so but at its core. Um, Desulfurization was we found that by alternating the way you charge the battery, you can make the battery last a lot longer. And so car manufacturers are seeing this now in cars. So you will not have the same charge voltage coming into your car consistently when you plug it in. It actually varies depending on the state of charge of the battery, the temperature of the battery, many other factors that go into how that car charges. So this overall, after looking at how to equalize it, we were able to have the batteries be much more efficient and effective in providing energy to the consumers. So that's a little bit of it. I'm in terms of the question of is it going to be grid connected? Is it going to be decentralized? A story Rahul said once to me, which resonated with electricity, was much like computers. In the beginning days of computers, you'd have one big computer, and it was very centralized. And they said there's no market for personal computers. Then we have personal computers, and then they said, oh, it's going to be decentralized forever. And then we have data farms where we say, oh, there's efficiency actually of processing. And now we have a hybrid of a very decentralized and centralized computing model. And I think very much electricity, you're seeing very developed markets like California go to a much more decentralized model. And so I do believe that as we grow, we're going to have a much more hybrid model. And as we get power to that 800 million people on the planet, I think that hybrid model is going to be essential in getting us there. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Steven. Yeah, so the next part of that story is now everyone is carrying supercomputers in their pockets. So yes, and slowly it may be in the directly a chip somewhere in the body. So Yes, it's going to be a combination of both, and yeah, I agree that we are going to have a mix of it. I think in terms of the analogy, in terms of the solar, where is solar going to become so cheap that everywhere we are just going to have solar? But it's like water, right? We do talk about water and energy nexus. With water, it's not the issue that we do not have enough water. We have water in most of the countries. We do get enough or surplus water during monsoon, but if you don't have the right storage, the you are not going to be have water available during summer months, and you are going to have droughts in the summer. So I think that's where I think storage is going to be the critical part. And again, once again, thank you, Mridula for having this, bringing in the storage perspective. So now, for storage perspective, no other person better than Vijayanand. So Vijayanand, handing it over to you for sharing your insights about the work which Amar Raja has done in this area, where he has experience huge on both lead acid side as well as now entering into the lithium ion side. So Vijayanand, handing it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul. And thanks, Dr. Mudula, for providing this opportunity on behalf of ISA. Uh, yeah. To introduce myself, I am Vijayanand, currently president of the New Energy Business in the Amaraja Group. Amaraja Group is into energy storage and battery business for more than 3 decades now. And we've been able to build $1 billion plus business in India. And one of the things that I reflect back upon in terms of the Atmanirbhar initiative of the government for the last few years, I think the lead acid industry in India has truly become Atmanirbhar. It has met the requirements of whatever definition or parameters that you talk about being self-sufficiency in terms of being able to build batteries that meet best of the customer requirements, the most stringent application needs, manufactured in a globally competitive factories with a supply chain that is very, 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 very circular. So, to give you a quick brief, to very quick brief about what Amaraja is today. As I said, we sell more than $1 billion batteries, worth batteries. In terms of gigawatt hour, we have close to 17 gigawatt hour of lead acid battery manufacturing. I never used to measure lead acid in gigawatt hour till a couple of years ago, but lithium has now redefined the metrics. So we have about 17 gigawatt hour worth of battery manufacturing happening on the lead acid space, and we're just starting taking some baby steps on the lithium side. We have both automotive and industrial application markets being met with products that are very, very customized and configured for these markets and end applications. On the industrial side, telecom is a huge network in India with more than 700,000 telecom towers. And the commercial UPS segment is another very thriving. And Stephen did talk about data farms coming in. A huge amount of data centers are getting established in India, and a significant portion of them are still being powered by batteries as a backup, lead acid batteries to be more precise. We are now in the journey towards establishing one of the first gigafactory in India with the lithium technology. In about 7 years' time, we expect to set up about 16 gigawatt hour of lithium cell making facility, 5 gigawatt hour of pack making facility, addressing both mobility and stationary energy needs. As the transition happens in the energy storage technology, Amaraja would be navigating through that and then continue to lead. But here I am here today to talk about one or two specific cases, demonstrating how you can make universal energy accessible to communities that otherwise are not part of the ecosystem where grid is fully established. You have access to electricity coming in from large scale production centers for electricity. This is a project that was carried out in Nigeria. Can I have the previous slide, please? Yeah, it's a project that's carried out in Nigeria. It's a solarization of education institutions in Nigeria. May I request the panel members to probably sit here during the presentation? That makes it easy because this panel is not, this display panel is not working. Yeah. So it's a solarization of education institutions and associated needs for the society around that. Project owner is Rural Electrification Agency of Nigerian government, funded by ADB and World Bank. And from India, Sterling and Wilson is the EPC contractor for this. They provided the EPC infrastructure requirements. Installation was carried out about 4.5 years ago, way back in 2019. And Amaraja's role was to provide the energy storage solution for this. And can I have the next slide just to demonstrate what impact it's having? Close to about 600,000 students will have access to uninterrupted power through this project, and will have access to about 80,000 plus staff will have access to power. 15 primary health clinics will have access to uninterrupted power, and about 265 access roads and 10,000 plus street lights will be powered by this installation that's providing electricity. 860 generators are replaced. About 1,400 doctors are involved in getting benefited out of it. Vaccine refrigerators, 5,500 medical staff. It's a very significant impact project that's been carried out. So, what is this project about? Next slide, please. So, this is about installing a large scale solar power plant and energy storage system combined to provide round the clock power. And as you can see there, the three sites connected solar power is about 3.5 megawatt peak in one of the site. That will have 24 megawatt hour of energy storage with lead acid batteries. We use advanced VRLA lead acid batteries for this solution. And the site 2 had 1.3 megawatt peak of solar with about 8.4 megawatt hour, and site 3 is half a megawatt peak and then 5.4 megawatt hour. Combined, about 38 megawatt hour of lead acid battery installations. Today, till date, this is the largest lead acid battery energy storage installation globally, and it's been working trouble free for about 4.5 years. And what went into making this happen is the most exciting part. Collaborating with the communities there, collaborating with the rural electrification department of Nigeria, the multilateral batteries funding, the multilateral funds providing the financial assistance to that, and then getting the society engaged with it, training them on how do we use it. I'll have a small video clipping at the end of my presentation to give you a sense of it. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide. I'm also bringing in a perspective of what happens in India. One of the most taken for granted application is the home energy, needs in India. More than 25 million homes have some kind of energy storage sitting in their homes. I think 20 years ago it became a need because the grid is unstable, unreliable. So you needed emergency backup available. And the socio dynamics of this, if you were to look at it, number one reason people want this emergency power backup is kids' education, because it's in summer that you have power availability going down because the hydro generation is not there, and hence there are power cuts, scheduled and unscheduled, more unscheduled than scheduled, and that's the time your kids are studying for their exams, and you don't want lack of power to affect their preparation for the exams. And that becomes number one priority for families. It doesn't matter if it's high net worth individual families or people at the low end of the spectrum. So 25 million plus families today have energy storage sitting in their homes. And if you look at the statistics, as you can see there, about 45% of total deployed energy storage in the form of lead acid is home energy in the form of home inverters. 45%. These statistics surprised us when we actually started digging into it. Automotive is only about 34%, and balance is the typical classical industrial application. And an annual deployment rate where about close to 50 gigawatt hour of lead acid batteries are getting deployed. Again, the inverters make up for 40%, which is one of the largest. I think automotive and inverter are about the same rate in terms of 40% each. That's a level of home energy that's sitting there. And again, when I say 25 million homes having this, I believe that 25% of those 25 million homes, which is something like 6 million homes, are bottom of the pyramid homes. People who do not have otherwise have reliable access to power. The Indian government has done a fabulous job of taking grid to various nooks and corners, but still there are challenges of availability of power. Stephen talked about the productivity that it can enhance. That's where people need emergency backup power requirement, and that's what this is doing. Can I have the next slide, please? So some glimpses of how the battery energy storage is installed at rural communities, at individual home level, at community level, and it's doing a fantastic service. I think it's up to the technologists, academicians, and the corporate houses like us who need to really see how to improve these solutions much further. Stephen talked about improving the life of these batteries, making the power or energy more affordable. Next slide, please. I will now play a very small clipping to just demonstrate the impact that the Nigerian project has on the communities around.
Do you remember this? Once upon a time, this used to be a reliable source of life, but times have changed. Energizing Education Program, EEP, the federal government, implemented by the Rural Electrification Agency. They've taken things to the next level. This out. This out. With this fantastic project that thousand students and staff of Alex Kweme Federal University, Ndufo Likipo, will enjoy uninterrupted clean, safe, reliable, and sustainable energy from state of the art. Forget grammar, it will take 24 hours light without need of internet. So when I have said in addition to what I said in the one, people is still all over campus. And to ensure that these facilities stay on our work with our students. So we need to maintain the facility in the future. The seven federal universities will benefit from this project, plus 7 teaching hospitals. Oh, dear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vijayananji, and I think again thank you for sharing this video, because I think most of us who work in this area, I think seeing this not it just about the numbers and presentations, but actually interacting with people where this is transforming their lives is something which is really inspirational. So for the final presentation, I would like to invite Ms. Mukabanji from NG Energy Access. They have done a lot of interesting projects, and would love to hand it over to her. Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies, I do not have a slide deck, but I hope you can visualize as I speak about our experience as NG. So I'm coming in from NG Energy Access. I'm responsible for business development in the Southern African region. What do we as NG do? So NG Energy Access is an arm of NG that is responsible for accelerating energy access with a sustainable means, but we do so with a complete smile and an exceptional customer experience. We have offices in 9 markets, and 5 out of those 9 markets have mini grid development. I know there's a bit of talk that has gone about the kind of electrification, but I think I'll still echo on the words of Rahul that no power at all is much more expensive than having power. So, storage. Looking at the global drive towards sustainability and the fact that Africa is endowed with so many renewable resources. For one, I'll focus on solar, which is our key turnkey project. If you look at most African countries, we have an average of 12 hours of sunlight. So what remains with the other 12 hours? It means that we need critical mass that is able to contain that power at one point and be able to dispatch it at the time that it's needed. And that's where battery storage comes in. So if you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, obviously there's certain kind of technology like lead acid gel batteries that was there. And because then we had so much information about lead acid, we had so much information about gel, and the cost efficiencies were actually there. If you compared it with lithium at that point, we had no information about lithium. So we have this storage that we're now using as a backup for a solution that was able to actually give reliability for the type of customers that we would have. Going further, we're now talking about lithium. I'll get into those supply chain issues a bit later. So for the type of grids that we create, we typically want to have a mini grid that is able to have a significant or consistent reliability. The reason for that is we want to focus on the productive usage of the electricity to run away from lighting. Of course, we do have solutions like solar home systems, solar-based systems that will respond to the immediate needs. But if you're going to talk about a drive towards productivity for the usage of the electricity, obviously you have to have a complete solution. So I'll focus on a mini grid that we have in the eastern part of Zambia. And this is a Chitandika mini grid where it's a mini grid of 28.35 kilowatt of PV, 96 kilowatt hours of battery storage. So, what has been our learning experience from this? Getting into a place that has never had electricity, obviously, we're excited to have this project that is obviously going to drive transformation, unlock the productive and socio-economic potential of that country, of that community. So, what happens? We procure any machine without knowing about grid compatibility. And of course, for a 28.35 kilowatt machine, mini grid, imagine you procure 4 machines with 25 horsepower and they are rated at 11 kilowatts each. So already that gives you 44 kilowatts for a 28.35 kilowatt machine. So what happens with that? Before an hour, your battery storage is run out. That's a problem because already our lead acid batteries are capped at a certain level of depth of discharge. Beyond that point, you definitely cannot switch them on. So obviously you have to have a backup for a backup. What does that do? The fact that you're an expert in electricity does not mean that you're an expert in other things. Of course, that would bring in the fact of having strategic partnerships of the different kind of appliances that would then be plugged on to revolutionize the usage of that electricity. So, of course, we had to partner with this appliance supplier who was then able to resize and continue to resize for a good 2 years to be able to have a grid compatible machine that would then be plugged on to our grid. So that went on for about 2 years, and we came to a point where now we're able to have machines that are now providing a service not just for the community, but for the surrounding villages around. What that does is that it then brings in revenue into that rural economy, and that rural economy grows. So now let me come back to the storage. Coming back to lead acid and lithium ion. Both are technologies that are still in use today. But if you look at the mini grids that were developed, say 3, 4 years ago, or even 5 years ago, most of them are on lead acid. But if you come into Africa, if you ask about how many recycling or repurposing companies are there to actually be able to respond to most of those batteries that will be coming to end of life, if they're existent, then probably their processes are not very efficient. Should we go to lithium ion? Lithium ion is the next best thing, especially if we're talking about sustainability. But how's the availability for a country like Zambia or any other country that is far from the point of entry, like a sea, like a seaport? That already is a question. We can be talking about it, but the fact that, first of all, our customs agencies may not necessarily understand the HS coding of lithium compared to the HS coding of lead acid, already that has a cost comparative because then it makes one solution much more expensive, even when the other one might be much more climate efficient. So as we're looking at different things, I think bringing into context the electricity infrastructure currently present, the development goals of that particular community or country is something to take into perspective as we're trying to look at the electrification strategy for a specific country, economy, or region. So all of this has to take a nuanced approach, but even as we take a nuanced approach at electrification, there's obviously need for us to look at it from a sustainability perspective so that us responding to short-term electrification needs does not compromise sustainability of the future. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Mukha, for sharing those interesting insights. Again, as you said rightly, there is a lot of capacity of understanding lead acid batteries in many remote areas, and that makes it something which, for some of the newer technologies which are getting deployed, we need to work on the skill building and capacity on that. I think Mridula had a presentation which she was going to share on it. Unfortunately, because of lack of time, she's skipping it. But let's continue to work on this together. I think what all three presentations have showed is there is no one silver bullet where either we will have only mini grids or we will have only grid expansion. But if we value time, if we value that we have almost billion people who can actually improve their lives by getting access to productive energy usage, I think mini grid solutions are here and they can make a difference right now rather than waiting for grid expansion, which could take in best cases at least 4 or 5 years, but most likely even possibly more than decade or longer. And we don't want to lose that time. So again, once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Mrudula, Rameshji, and International Solar Alliance team for providing this platform for bringing attention to mini grids, because many times nowadays when we talk about solar, we only talk about not just mega but giga or hundreds of gigawatt scale, and most of the media attention is towards how big and large ultra mega or ultra giga solar farms are becoming. But the key thing is solar energy is reaching to every part of the world, and where energy is required. So we can definitely continue and utilize mini grids for this. So handing it back to Mridula ji. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rahul. And as a token of appreciation, I would request Mr. Ramesh Kumar, Chief of PPIC Unit, ISA, to give token of appreciation to the panelist. I would like to invite Dr. Rahul Valavalkar to please accept the souvenir from us. Thank you. Mr. Vijayanand Samudrala, President, New Energy, Amar Raja Energy and Mobility. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Fernandez, President, Customized Energy Solutions, USA. Ms. Mukabanji Matanda, Business Development Manager, Onji Energy Access, Zambia. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to a closure of the event. And anybody left?
No, no, we can have a group.
Oh, yeah. So I'll just invite Mr. I think DG is here. See, DG is available. Actually, this is last. That is the next one. This is the one. Thank you. Thank you. He's middle of the financial.